Greetings from Stanford University. I'm Bill Barnett, professor at the Stanford Doerr School of Sustainability and the Stanford Graduate School of Business.
And I'm Charlotte Kramer, a current undergraduate at Stanford.
And we have with us here today Professor Roldopho Dirzo from the Stanford Doerr School of Sustainability. And Roldopho, you just concluded a 2-day conference on the duality of environmental justice.
Correct.
It is so intriguing. And Charlotte, you were there. And what are your reactions?
I came into this conference, I think, not fully appreciating the importance of environmental justice. People were talking about like EJ, and I was like, did Ernst & Young change their name again?
Yeah.
EJ? Then I put the pieces together.
Yes.
And then I realized that it's huge. It's so
important. It's a huge topic,
It's the only mechanism that really works for every community. If you apply kindness and a sense of sharing and diversity, you can build solutions.
Yeah.
And there's just a lot to learn. And that's another thing. I love the emphasis on learning and how we as scholars and students and academics can view environmental justice movements and stuff.
But it's interesting, Bill, because the two of you actually mentioned keywords there. Bill said intriguing, and you said it's difficult to understand. And in fact, the EJ term is not really transparent. It could be many different things. But I think an essential element of this thing is the topic of disproportionality. So I mentioned at some point in the conference that this is a two-headed monster. So the big body is the disproportionality, but it has two angles to it, and hence the term duality. Because we tend to think of the problems of environmental injustice in terms of the sort of harmful aspects of the environment: pollution, climate change, mining, those things that are, horrible pollutants and horrible contaminated water affecting disproportionately some communities. But we have not paid as much attention, I think, to the other aspect of the monster, which is the fact of what we call ecosystem services, the beauty of nature and what it provides to humanity. Also, but most unfortunately, is not distributed as it should be in a fair way.
Yeah.
Again, frontline communities, underserved people are not enjoying the beauty and the benefits of nature and environmental services that it provides. This is one head, and the other head is the more typical one, the nasty aspects of the environment. Pollution being a very good representation of that is the thing that we always tend to pay attention to. So the idea on this particular conference was to bring together these two emphases and make people aware of the two-headed monster.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. Is there a specific example that can bring that home to the listeners?
Yes, a specific example on the nasty head, which is the harmful aspects of the environment. The typical example that everybody will understand: the emissions of greenhouse gases, which create this horrible problem of climate change. I mean, warming of the atmosphere, warming of the planet, and then climate change. Turns out that the people, the countries and sectors within countries that contribute the least to that problem are the ones that are going to be so heavily impacted. So you have a negative aspect of the global environmental changes affecting these people disproportionately. And let's move to the other extreme in the case of the positive aspects of nature, of the environment. For example, cultural and recreational benefits of nature. If we go to national parks in the US, a great proportion of people who can have access to those wonderful, psychologically healthy, rewarding activities as going to a national park, a very low proportion of the population in the US and globally have access to those wonderful beauties of the planet. The beauty of, the inspiration that you get from going to a place, the psychological benefits that you get from being exposed or in contact with nature, that is not afforded equally amongst different sectors of society.
That's interesting. That's so interesting.
Yeah, actually, one talk that really, really inspired me was Professor Jones, Jamie Jones.
Jamie Jones, yes.
He mentioned one thing that's just like stuck with me for ever since he said it. I'm still thinking about it. He said, extinction is forever.
Yes.
And people don't seem to realize it.
Yes.
And I was thinking about it and I was like, yeah, I really don't seem to realize it. You know, I think like there are a couple out there, like it's okay, but it's not okay because that is a decision that you can never reverse. Like that is a decision that you are making for the entire future of our planet. And people are so, you know, like this whole Jurassic Park idea of, dinosaurs back to life. But that's not on the table right now. Right now, extinction is forever.
Yeah.
And we're not treating it as such.
We're not giving the attention, the significance of it.
Yeah.
So a couple of things about that. So Jamie Jones is an evolutionary biologist like myself. And so we have this situation really very clear. It's amazing to think, and for the people who are listening to us, about 95% of the species that have been on the planet, they have gone extinct. So the fate of species is to go extinct. If you go back in time, you will see that in the fossil record, there's millions of species that have gone extinct. Extinction is forever. It's actually of the many global environmental changes, climate change, land use change, pollution, invasive species, and so on. Biological extinction is the only one that is completely irreversible. Climate change is going to be very tricky for us to fix it, but potentially we could do it. Once species or set of populations of a given species go extinct, that's it. There is this idea that we can do de-extinction, which is a very a thing that needs to be thought about carefully because that is not a reality. So it's an interesting idea, but it's not a feasible idea.
Exactly.
But extinction is really forever.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I have to mention this to the people who are listening to us. The planet has experienced 5 major massive extinctions in the past over the last 550 million years of life on the planet. And we can see that the planet has been able to come back, and in fact has been able to come back in exuberant, beautiful exuberance. For example, the last extinction, which was about 65 million years ago when the dinosaurs went extinct, after that, you see the planet so beautiful. Nature came back relentlessly. We have the most diversified planet today. So we know that the planet is going to be okay. What is not going to be okay is the species that go extinct. And unfortunately, we have to say that the extinction risk now, the existential problem in terms of extinction is for these species that we know by the name of Homo sapiens. The planet is going to be okay. So we're happy, with many people say, I'm working to save the planet. That's a commendable idea. But even if we did not do anything about that, the planet will be fine, but it will take multiple millions of years to come back to the same level of diversity. And then what comes later is not the same what you had before.
Yeah, this is so interesting to me. It's the same idea of the long-terminism that he's talking about, or long-terminist. And it just immediately brings me back to high school economics when my teacher is talking about John Maynard Keynes and says the infamous quote, "In the long run, we are all dead." And that is so clear to me. And that's what Professor Jones was saying as well, that okay, you're right, the planet's going to be okay. So at least we can shove that moral qualm aside. But are we going to be okay?
Yeah.
And if we take this view of it'll all work out, we're not going to be okay. Yeah. The planet will be okay, but...
Yeah, the planet is going to be okay, but not this particular species. And we know that species, they will go extinct.
Yeah. Well, there were a number of papers, and they came from various perspectives.
Yeah.
Roldopho, earlier you were talking about the diversity of this conference. Can you comment a little more on that?
Yeah, I want to bring that up to the attention of the people who are listening to us, because a critical issue for us to deal with this crisis that we're facing today is adaptation, another aspect that Jamie Jones brought to the discussion. For adaptation, you need diversity, right? If you have a homogeneous situation and there's a change, and that change is not good, is harmful for any single person, that's going to be harmful for everybody because they're the same. But if you have diversity, we know it from Charles Darwin, from The Origin of Species. Diversity is the basis for natural selection to operate and bring the possibilities to do adaptation. And I'm delighted to say that this conference was really very well represented in terms of diversity. About 55% of the speakers were African American.
Interesting.
A great proportion of the speakers, really a great majority of the speakers, were women, which is very interesting. We had people from indigenous communities being speakers, or being the main speakers, or also speakers in the short presentations, in the lightning talks. So really, diversity was so well manifested in a topic that addresses diversity. Environmental justice is to pay attention to the diversity, especially to pay attention to the people who have been oppressed by so many centuries, even millennia, right? And the other aspect of duality is that we tend to think that all of these problems of disproportionality are impacting society today, but in fact, this is a very old problem. As the saying goes, it's a problem of all times. Let's think, for example, of an emblematic case, the plague in England, the 1665. Many people were able to survive because they were the wealthy people, because they were living in conditions that were not so challenged by lack of hygienic situations and so on. When the plague expanded so dramatically in London, people had to be evacuated. Guess who was evacuated? The people who had the money, the conditions, the wealth, and the people who were not evacuated were the people who were living in the lumbers, in the low-income societies, sectors of society in those places. So this has been a dramatic problem since many centuries ago. Unfortunately, this is the sad thing that we have it omnipresent today.
Mm-hmm.
My goodness.
If I could add one last thing to just attest to the diversity of this conference, and this is something that I haven't seen in any other conference on sustainability, and that was the inclusion of art.
Yes.
As everything almost. It was a mechanism for telling one's own story, for driving social change, for making statements. It was really so ingrained in the idea of what it means to advocate and to be a part of social justice, and also to build a community, which I thought was really interesting. Art as a collective project instead of just the project that you do yourself.
Yeah, because it's a collective project, and also because of the fact that art is so close to nature. I mean, when you look at a photograph of a beautiful landscape, it's really, in some sense, very artistic. When you look at the beauty of plants and animals and what they do, it's so artistic and so inspirational that I think art is a fantastic vehicle to create synergy with the science, with the scholarship of environmental justice, to address the problems. And because art can be so transparent and so democratic to society at large, I think this is a fantastic partner that the scholarship of environmental justice has in the arts. And so we saw manifestations of the art in terms of movie making, in terms of theater, in terms of poetry, and really multiple manifestations of art accompanying environmental justice to make this problem so visible, so appreciated, and hopefully so well addressed by society today.
So, I'd love to ask each of you, what was the biggest surprise that hit you out of this conference? And Charlotte, why don't you start us off?
One of my favorite talks, and one that I've also been turning over in my head of it, was one about anger and whether or not we should express our anger in environmental justice movements. And I think this was Nancy Thresher.
Yeah, Dr. Thresher, yeah.
And she said, you know what, get angry about climate change. Go and get angry, because you know what, then at least you're not giving up into despair and paralyzation. And this sort of despair I've talked about a lot on this podcast series. I feel it so deeply, and it hit home for me to have someone say, no, stay angry, because if you stay angry, then you still have hope. And hope is very, very, very important. So express your anger. But then I have questions about, as a woman and as a young person, especially going into, several industries, and I don't know what I want to do with my life. I don't know how I'm allowed to get angry and still be respectful.
Yeah.
You know, I'll say something here. I'm not an expert on anger, but but I am an ancient, and so I've dealt with it more frequently, like a lot of times. I'm often really angry about climate change and about sustainability, but that doesn't mean other people know that. And
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so that expression, it motivates me to try to make things happen.
Yeah.
And that underlying feeling is expressed in different ways. And so, you know, I think I've learned over the years that I end up much happier as the result of having expressed my deep feelings in a constructive way, even if those deep feelings are pretty strong.
The point came in the conversation, Bill and Charlotte, that you know, angry can be expressed in a constructive way as well. So constructive anger, I think, is the duality again that we need to be cultivating.
It just seems like such a fine line to me.
I know it's a very tricky thing to sort of define, but I think that ultimately, when angry and hope come together, then you have a fantastic synergy to address problems, because we really need to be so concerned to the point of being angry about these problems. But I mean, you cannot abandon hope when there is hope. And the reality, my friends, that there is hope now to address some of the critical crisis of sustainability today. But I think that duality of hope and anger going together can be a very useful instrument for us to address those critical issues.
No, very much.
Yeah,
very much. And how about you, Roldopho? What was surprising to you coming out of this conference?
What surprised to me is on a positive sense, is that the variety of manifestations of environmental injustice. And the surprise to me was that many people, many students, and many scholars are addressing so many different problems, but with a very clear idea as to how to understand them rigorously, and then how to address them with passion, but also with the guidance of scientific knowledge. There was a number of conferences that talks that emphasized that very topic. We need reliable, good information to be able to address the problems in a more effective way. Now, the variety of topics that were addressed in this conference was really surprising to me. This is a little bit scatological, but one of the persons actually talked about this critical issue that I had not thought about. For example, open defecation. I mean, a huge problem when you think about many communities around the planet, India, Southeast Asia. I mean, just think about that, the magnitude of that problem as one imagines that. But when you sit in reality with the numbers and with the description of how tricky it is to address, those kinds of things really were very, very surprising to me. The multiple tentacles of environmental injustice. I mean, I knew about many of those, but to get to know that there's so many, that was really very surprising to me.
You know, these are issues that many people don't want to face.
Yeah.
Or dismiss perhaps as culture specific, as if people would want to be in a situation where they don't have hygiene and are openly defecating. And of course, that's not the case. People all over the world want to be able to live the better life that so many of us listening to this podcast know. And the very fact that we don't see it every day doesn't make it real and vivid. And it's going on right now as we speak.
Yeah, but I mean, the variety of aspects of environmental injustice that we need to do, pay attention to. Related to your question, Bill, the other thing that in some sense surprised me is the fact that we have so much work to do. I mean, I thought that I was aware of the magnitude of the challenge, but seeing all of the multifaceted aspects of environmental injustice makes me realize that this is a very, very challenging situation that demands our undivided attention and our commitment to address it. I'm so glad that our dean he actually is very clear on that. He actually mentioned that in his speech yesterday, and in other occasions he has said that we cannot aspire to sustainability. We do not address this critical issue of environmental justice.
Yeah, that's very good. So look, I'm going to let you, Charlotte, have the last word as the representative of the future generation. How would you like to close this podcast on the topic of environmental justice?
I'd say it's a big problem. It's a lot to do. You're right. I think there was something to be said about the method that you guys are doing it in. It's about finding the community and lifting each other up, because it is such a difficult topic. I mean, these disparities between people are huge, and it is so difficult to be confronted with that on a daily basis. And so finding a methodology really rooted in community and community spaces and working together, I think there's a lot to do, but at least we've sort of figured out how to do it.
There were some aspects that were mentioned about methodology that we can apply to that, but more philosophically or emotionally, if you like, humility and empathy would be keywords to address this very technical, scientific problem. Empathy and humility would be crucial to address these problems.
Yeah, what an amazing insight! A combination of some of the deepest human emotions to deal with some of the most real, factual inequities that the human race has ever known. Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, Roldopho. To you listeners, thank you very much for being here. I'm Bill Barnett, and until next time.
The Stanford Initiative on Business and Environmental Sustainability podcast series is sponsored by the Stanford Graduate School of Business and the Stanford Dorr School of Sustainability. Music by Charged Particles. That's Caleb Hutzler, Mike Rock, and John Krosnick.